Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. Welcome back to another video. This is Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course Greatest Hits Level 1. This is Lesson 12. We're going to look at pages 22 and 23 in our book today. The song, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? All right, so welcome back. It's good to be back again with you guys for another video. So we're looking at pages 22 and 23, Can You Feel the Love Tonight, which is from The Lion King. If you notice at the top of page 22, it says at the top right corner, use after page 83 or page 131. So just as a reminder, that is if you're going through the Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course Lesson Book, Level 1. You're going to want to wait until at least page 83. I always recommend waiting actually a little bit longer than that to begin this piece. And if you're using the all-in-one lesson book level 1, you're going to want to wait till page 131. And like I always say at the beginning of every one of these lessons from the Greatest Hits book, these pieces are actually a lot more challenging than where you would be at. This example would be page 83. I don't know offhand what lesson that is, but it sounds like that's closer to the end of the book. But I just want to throw that out there. You can start immediately when you finish page 83, but I would recommend staying away from this piece before page 83. And if you feel very frustrated with this lesson and you've only arrived at page 83, like I said, I always recommend that maybe wait, just hold off a little bit longer. All right, so this is a pretty popular piece. It's a very nice arrangement. It's 3 pages long, so actually it's page 22, 23, and 24. So I missed that earlier, but 3 pages, our first 3-page piece in this book. Now, there is some repetition to it, so it's not like 3 pages of all different material. The melody in this piece is going to pretty much, if not always, be in your right hand. When we started this book, that wasn't always the case. Sometimes the melody would be in both hands, which, has its challenges. In some ways, this is easier just keeping it all in the right hand, which is pretty typical of most piano music. So we will start with the right hand here in just a moment. There is also pedal. A lot of pedal in this piece. We are going to save that for later in the video, and I'll throw up the pedal cam when we look at that later on. Notice that it's in the key of C major, so that's kind of nice. No sharps, no flats in your key signature. Occasional sharp or flat in the piece. They'll be written in, but C major for the key signature. 4/4 time, it's a pretty basic time. If you look at the rhythms, though, there are some eighth notes. So when we get to the counting, we are going to want to use the 1 and, 2 and, 3 and, 4 and. There is a bit of syncopation. Now, this is considered like pop music. And the challenge with pop music is not always so much the notes, but more of the rhythm. So we're definitely going to be digging into the rhythm just a little bit more. And how do we know there's syncopation? Well, if you look at measure 1. There is a tie right in the middle of the right hand of that measure. So almost always when you see a tie within a measure, that represents syncopation. And just as a quick review, what is syncopation? The simple short answer is syncopation is when a long note is actually coming in on the weak part of the beat and held through the strong part of the beat. So in other words, if I'm playing a quarter note on the and of, say, beat 1, and then I'm holding it through beat 2, that is syncopation. So normally like a quarter note coming in on beat 1, beat 2, beat 3, not syncopation. But when it's played on the and then when you get to beat 2 and you're still holding, that's syncopation. If you have an eighth note on the and, that's not syncopation because after an eighth note, you're going to play something else usually or rest on the big beat. But a long note coming in on the weak part of the beat, which is and, being held through the next strong beat, which is 1, 2, 3, or 4. Does that make sense? Hopefully. We've done it in the past, but we'll dig into it a little bit further when we get into the rhythms here in just a moment. So we're going to start with the right hand. We're going to start with the melody notes. And notice that your first note is A above middle C with the second finger. So again, I will kind of go through the rhythms right now, but I'm going to focus on notes and fingering. So, like I said, we got 2 on A. On beat 2, we've got B to C. Now that's our first little bit of syncopation. The B is on beat 2, and the C is on the and of 2, and then we're holding that C through beat 3. So since I brought it up, I'll do a little bit of the counting here. So the A is 1 and then the B is 2, and the C is and then you hold it 3 and then the D is 4 and. Okay, so once again, that's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now going at the slow pace, going with just the right hand, it doesn't feel very syncopated. When we add the left hand later, and when we go a little bit faster, you'll probably feel that syncopation a little bit more. Now, I won't go through all the rhythms in that much detail yet because I want to get through the notes first. So going on to measure 2, you're going to have your fourth finger on C, and you're going to come down to the G with your thumb. And that's a dotted half note, which will fill out the rest of the measure. Now, when you get to measure 3, look at measure 1 and look at measure 3. Same exact thing, same exact rhythms. So measure 3 is a repeat of 1. So measure 3, and I'll go ahead and do it with the counting since we already did it earlier, is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then you come back to the C once again, but it's a whole note in that last measure for 4 counts. Now when you get to measure 5 on the second line, it's almost like measure 1 and 3 again. You've got the A, you've got B and C. Beat 4 is different. You've got C again, followed by D. So those are 2 eighth notes, and then measure 6, C, down to G, and then on beat 3, you're going to come all the way up to E with your 5th finger. So if you're in a relaxed hand position, notice that E is marked with the 5th finger. It seems obvious. But see, if 4 is on C, where's your 5th finger? It's on D. So it's just a little reminder that you're going to have to stretch that 5th finger over just a little bit. And then the next measure, you got to be careful. You got to pick up that 5th finger and bring it to F. Now you're not going to stretch to F. You're going to bring the whole hand to F. And then after the F, that means 4th finger's on E, 3rd finger's on D. And then on beat 4, you're back to the E. And then the last measure of that line, 3rd finger is on the D for 4 counts. Now, we're going to measure 9. Notice where the hand position is. My thumb is around A or B. But in measure 9, I need to take that 2nd finger down to A. So just lift your hand and bring it down. Again, this is a repeat of measure 1. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. In fact, look at measure 9, 10, 11, and 12. All of it is a repeat of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So with that being said, let's play measure 9, 10, 11, and 12. So actually, I'll do it with the counting. Why not? So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Measure 11, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And measure 12, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, measure 13 is a little bit different. It still starts the same. We got the A, we got the B and the C. The rhythm's a little different here. You come down to G with your thumb on the and of beat 3, and then you hit again on 4 with that quarter note. Measure 14, heads up. You got a big jump. You're going to bring the whole hand up, but this is a little tricky. You're working with weak fingers. 5 on G, and on top of that, you got to be ready for 4 on E. Now what I want you to do is I want you to play the G with your 5th finger and the 4 on E together. It's not the easiest thing to do unless you have very long fingers, very large hand. If you have smaller hands, smaller fingers like me, that is a stretch. Not the most comfortable or easy thing to do. But that's essentially what you need to be in the position for at measure 14. So it's more than just going to the fifth finger on G, but really be ready for the stretch. Now, if you can do this, if you can come out of measure 13 like this, and you can jump up to 14 and play E and G together, like I just did, then you're ready to rock. You're good. Now, you don't have to do that, but you do need to be ready, at least mentally, that immediately after that 5 on G, you're going to stretch the 4 to E. Okay? But if you can play these together, then you're good. You've got it. You've really strengthened those fingers, and you've kind of outlined what's to come ahead of time. So that's just going to make it easier. Now in beat 3, you've got 2 on C. That one's easy because you're skipping the third finger on D. So there's 2 on C. And then beat 4, the A with the thumb, that's easy to do. Now measure 15, you're going to come back up to 5 on F. And then 4 on E, 3 on D, back to E on beat 4, and then measure 16, D with the third finger for 3 counts. Then you're going to drop down or stretch. You can actually stretch with your thumb. You got the thumb on G, and this begins the chorus. Now you have a full octave here. So your thumb's on G, and you're going to 5 on G. Now, if you can reach that with a stretch like this, that's fine. If you need to jump like this, that's fine too. Your pedal will actually help smoothen it out. But obviously, if you could stretch, that's probably a little bit better. It'll be even smoother. But don't worry if you can't. The jump is fine. So we got this G for 2 counts, and then our third finger's on E, and then our second finger's on D. Notice the D is tied into measure 18, top of page 23, for another 2 counts. So that's a total of 3 counts on the D. At measure 18, you're going back up to the G on beat 3, and then we have our switch to 4 on E. And if you're wondering why not the third finger, well, it's because of measure 19. I got to get to the C, and I got to get down to A. Notice when I get down to A, I need my thumb. So if I use my third finger, I guess an argument could be made that you could use your third finger as long as you remember to stretch to 2 on the C. You could do that. Yeah, actually you could do that. I might even like that more. I'll leave it up to you. So at measure 18, the E, you could do either the 4, which they have written, or you could do 3. Because I find the stretch from 3 to 2 easier than from 5 to 4, right? Longer fingers, stronger fingers. So yeah, if you want to switch it to 3, you can do that. So at measure 18, on beat 3, you'd have 5 on G, 3 on E. Notice the E's on beat 4, and it's tied another 2 beats into measure 19. And then beat 3 in measure 19, you got 2 on C and the thumb on A. And the A is tied for a total of 5 counts. Now, when you get to measure, the last 2 measures, what is that, 21? You're going to rest for 2 counts. You have a half rest. The thumb was on A, it's going to come down to G. Bring your second finger over to C. And then the last measure of that line, 5 on the F for 2 counts. And then E, D is tied. This is a long tie. You play it on beat 4. It's tied in measure 23 for 4 more counts. So that's 5 counts. And then in measure 24 for another 2 counts, 6, 7. That's a total of 7 counts. We'll get to the counting later. Measure 24, you're going to rest on beats 3 and 4 because there's a half rest. And then the third measure, measure 25, you're going to rest on 1 and 2. Bring your second finger down to A. And then B with the third finger. the next measure, C with the fourth finger, and then you have 2 Gs on beats 3 and 4 with your thumb. We have a big octave jump like earlier, 5 on G. And then you could, once again, either 4 or 3, which, by the way, if you go back to measure 14 where we encountered the 5 and 4, I know I made a big deal about strengthening those fingers, but I didn't realize it at the time. But at 14, you could do 5 on G, 3 on E, 2 on C, and thumb on A. So you could do that. I didn't notice that earlier. The way I look at it is it's easier. It's probably easier to do 3. However, if you want to get your fourth finger stronger, you could force yourself to practice this, right? So I'll leave it up to you. I tend to do 3, to be honest. I tend to do 3. So I could do 4, but 3 just comes naturally. It's easier. So if you want to do 3, go for it. So every time we have this G to E, I think there won't be any exception, but it could be either 4 or 3 in every case. So going back to page 23, second line, last measure, measure 27, got the G. E could be 3 or 4. I'll try 3. 28 on the third line, we got 2 C's with the second finger and then thumb on A for 3 counts. Now in measure 29, we got our first harmony in the right hand. We got A, you're already on it with the thumb, and then add the F for 2 counts, 1 and 5. So A and F moves to G and E. Notice that's the next 2 white keys down on the keyboard. So keep that locked position, 1 and 5, and just slide it down. Now you could do the same thing, but we won't on F and D, and there's a reason for this. You're going to do 1 and 4, which is a little more of a stretch, but you need that 5th finger for E on beat 3. Then you're going to go back to the D, and that D is tied just like we had earlier for a total of, what was that, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 counts. Actually, it's longer. The tie is longer. This one's 8. Previously, it was 7. That takes us all the way to the end of the third line. On beat 4, thumb on G. Now this is, oh, I see why they did this. I was about to say, so let's check this out. Your thumb's on G. You're going up an octave, measure 33, 5 on G. They marked that E with the 3rd finger, but they did it because you don't go all the way to C after the E. You go to D. So I guess their thinking in the book was, it's not easy for us to go from the 3rd finger on E to 2 on C. Yeah, it's easier to go 4 to 2, but I will still stand by the fact that I think it's easier to go 3 on E to 2 on C than 5 on G to 4 on E. So I digress a little bit. But anyways, going back to measure 33, absolutely it makes sense to do 5 on G to 3 on E and then 2 on D. That D is tied. And then measure 34 on beat 3, you're back up to G. Now here they marked 4 on the E because look at where you're going, C, A. But again, if you want to do 3 on the E, go for it. And then in measure 35, you can still do 2 on C, thumb on A. A is tied all the way through the next measure. You got a half rest on the last measure, jump down slightly, thumb on G. 2 on C, and then we got a page turn. So there's the 2 on C, and then be ready at measure 38, 5 on the F. Okay, and then that'll put 4 on E, 3 on D. Okay, that D is tied for 7 counts. That takes us all the way to beat 3 of the second to last measure on this line, which is measure 41. Bring 2 down to A, 3 on B, And then last measure, 4 on C. You'll have your thumb on G for beats 3 and 4. And then measure 43, another octave jump. So you can see there's a lot of repetition in this piece. We keep playing this G to E, right? There it is again. And again, I'll let you decide. 5 on G, if you want to do 4 or 3. But if you do 3, make them all 3s. Change them all, be consistent, and write it in so that you don't have to guess. You don't want the option when you're performing. You like to have the option now, but then you got to decide and then stick with it. So 5 on G, 4 or 3 on the E. Measure 44, second finger on the C, 2/8 notes, thumb on the A. Now there's a pickup here, meaning you're going to pick up your thumb and put it on G. We don't have that too often. And then you're going to pick it up again in measure 45 and bring that thumb to A and your 5th finger to F. And just like earlier, bring both of those fingers down to G and E. But this is a little different. We're going to stay with 1 and 5, going to F and D in the next measure, and then F and C is where we use 1 and 4. In the last measure, this is an F chord. F, A, and C, 1, 3, and 5. So your 4th finger was on C. You're going to have to bring the 3rd finger over to A and your 5th finger to C to play that chord successfully. Okay? And then 48, that C is actually tied. So you're going to hold that for 4 counts, and then 48, bring your thumb down to E. Your 2nd finger should be on G. So what's happening is you hold the C, the F and the A become E and G. Now measure 49, you got a rest for 2 counts. Bring the 2nd finger over to A, 3rd finger B, and then measure 50, 4th finger on C. It doesn't say it, but make sure your thumb is on these Gs. Another octave jump to G. Yet again, 4 on E or 3 on E, take your pick. I'll do 3. Last measure of the line, 2 Cs. With your 2nd finger, thumb on A. And again, bring your thumb down to G. And measure 53 at the bottom, bring your thumb back to A, add the F. So again, we're repeating what we just played on the 2nd line. So 1 and 5 down to G and E. Down to F and D. F and C with 1 and 4. And then our F chord yet again with 1, 3, and 5. This time it is tied. All 3 notes are tied for both measures. And then we end the song with G and E. Bring 1 and 5 up. And that's tied for the last 2 measures. So there is a lot of repetition. So when you look at 3 pages, it's just a lot of repeating of several ideas. We saw this high G and high E that we talked about, whether you do 4 or 3 on it, again and again and again. So there is a lot of repetition. All right, so I'm going to go back to the beginning with the right hand, and let's focus on rhythm. So we talked about in measure 1, so remember, we're going to count with the ands. Even more important, it's not so much the 8th notes, although that's a big part of it, but when you have syncopation, you really, really need to be precise. So you really need to break it down with the ands. Not until you've had a lot of experience with syncopation do you really need to maybe just count 1, 2, 3, 4, and at that point you feel it. Of course, someday, years from now, maybe sooner, you won't have to count at all. You just feel these rhythms. But when you're first learning syncopation, for most of us, if not all of us, it's really highly recommended you slow it down and do count. Like I said, you won't feel it, but at least you'll be accurate. You'll have a strong starting point, and then you'll slowly speed it up, and you'll get there. It's a slow song though. Anyways, it says slowly with a steady beat. Now, more moderate slow, in my opinion. It's not super slow, so it moves a little bit. So this first measure, let's review. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now, we said measure 3 is the exact same thing. So measure 3 is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Same notes, same rhythm, same everything. When you encounter the syncopation in this piece in the right hand, it's often in the same place. So in measures 1 and 3, that tie was on and 3 and. So you're going to see it a lot on and 3 and. So measure 5, same thing. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now 4 and in measure 5 is different than measures 1 and 3. Otherwise it was the same notes and rhythm once again. So measure 5 is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Jump over to measure 7. 5 on the F up here. So 1 and 2 and 3 and. Notice I stress the and on 2. That helps me remember that that's where the syncopation starts, or at least that's where my long note is, right? So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and on the E. So once again, the D is and 3 and. Measure 9 is the same way. 1 and 2 and 3 and. Measure 11 is the same way. Measure 13. So measure 15. So it occurs again and again and again. It's always in the same place. So if you're looking at it just from strictly a rhythm point of view, it's the exact same rhythm. In fact, you could go as far to say that it's always a quarter note on beat 1, followed by an eighth note on 2, and then an eighth note tied to a quarter note on the and 3. Now, beat 4 changes. Sometimes it's quarter note, sometimes it's 2 eighth notes. The one that's a little trickier, I'll jump over to, is measure 13, third line down, last measure. So it's still a C on and 3, but the and of beat 3 goes down to a G. So let's look at that. So it starts out the same. Second finger on A, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That's the first time we had that and 4 and. Normally, you don't have another note again until beat 4. So don't let that sneak up on you. So once again, measure 13 is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's a little different. All right, let's go back to the top, and I'm kind of going to play through this with the counting. I'll try my best not to choke on my counting. There's just, when you go slow and you're counting out loud 1 and 2 and, if you've ever tried that for the entire piece, you might have a glass of water next to you. You'd think I'd remember to do that, but I cannot remember. But anyways, the other thing to remember is that when you have long notes like measure 2, the dotted half note, the G, another reason why it's so important to count, because we tend to rush that. So if you're counting slow, that's going to be 2 and 3 and 4, and we tend to speed through that. Sometimes we don't have the patience or the time. And in some cases, I'd say, to someone who's been playing piano for a long time and very aware of that and aware that they're speeding up, I'd say, okay, that's fine. That's a great use of your time. But you don't want to develop bad habits early on. You don't want to get used to speeding through that and then you end up playing it that way. So in the beginning, it's still good to hold out and count through those longer notes. Okay? So let's start at the beginning. I'll give us a count off. Like I said, I'll do my best to count all the way through. But I'll stop when we get to some trickier places. But we pretty much covered all the tricky spots on the first page. So, all right, here we go. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 1 and 2 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 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 3, and 4, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3. And I'm actually going to stop right there. There's a good place to stop because that's the end of the verse. Then we go into the chorus. I wanted to mention another important spot to count is measure 14. Now 14 is where we have the first time we have the high G and we said, 3 or 4 on the E. So they're 4 steady quarter notes, no big deal, right? The problem is a lot of times I see when we have 4 quarter notes, this happens. I'm going to start measure 13. Okay, see what I did there at measure 14? I rushed it. I went too fast. I played them like eighth notes. Once we learn our notes and our fingering, quarter notes are so easy, especially when there's 4 in a row like that, to just breeze on by. Plus, it's coming down the piano. When you're descending, it's just a natural state to just speed something up. It's like falling down a hill, right? You go faster, gravity's pulling you down. It happens on piano too. You're coming down. You tend to speed up. So, really important to count with the ands so that you don't rush. So the essence is at 14, you don't want 1, 2, 3, 4. So you might say, well, I counted to 4. What's wrong? Well, you sped it up. You counted it right. Yeah, but you sped it up. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So that's very, very, very important. Seems like something that wouldn't happen. You'd be surprised how often it does. A lot of my students, not even aware of it. Not even aware of it. And then it becomes a problem when you get to the performance and people who know the song, ironically, but have no idea how to play it, are singing along, humming along, and they say, what happened? You just sped right through it. Because if a singer wouldn't go, it's enough for this restless warrior just to be with you. You see what I'm saying? That's silly, right? Well, when you're a piano player and you're thinking about 12 things at once, that can actually happen. So be careful with that. Otherwise, page 22 is pretty straightforward. And the thing we covered, which is in literally every other measure, the syncopation, we did that earlier. So the syncopation, the nice thing about it in this piece, it's repetitive. It's almost always on the and, 3 and, so you'll get plenty of practice with that. Let's pick it up, the chorus. The chorus actually starts on beat 4 in measure 16. So on the words, and can you feel the love tonight, that is where the chorus begins. So I'll give you a little count off and then we'll continue right there. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 I'm actually going to stop there because now when you put the hands together, this probably will be a little easier. That I just played, those 3, 4 measures, can really get you into trouble for the same reason I was talking about the quarter notes earlier. You got these long ties, you got these long holds. You just played the verse of this piece. It moves pretty quickly. I'm speeding it up, but 1 and 2 and 3 and... Right? There's more movement, there's eighth notes. Then we get to this. It feels like it's too slow. It feels like it's too slow. So there's the habit of Now, again, that's just the right hand by itself. When you put the left hand, it's probably going to slow down because you're thinking about more things. But again, if you want to be accurate, you got to count. You got to count. You got to count. It's not only the long notes, but it's also the ties. The ties are confusing. The first one is this D on beat 4 at the bottom of the page. 4 and then it's tied into 1 and 2 and. Now, actually, all 3 of these ties were always on beat 4, so that helps. But again, I'm going to start one more time, and then I'll keep going. But I just want to reiterate that very important on this chorus of this song to count this out because it can be easily rushed. So same place, beginning of the chorus. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 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 3, 4. So right there, I kind of switched to 3, 4 because I wanted to stop long tie and make sure you're off on beat 3 of measure 24. At that point, it's easy to just keep holding the tie forever and ever. Now, if you do, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world, but look what's happening in the left hand. We got more movement, something that's interesting. I think the intention there was to rest in the right hand and not cover up that moment there that the left hand sort of having. So, measure 23, 24, you're still tied. Going into 25. So your third finger is on the D. Your second finger is going to move down to the A. So right on measure 25, we have a half rest. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. Yeah, third line, be ready for that. 2/8 notes come out of nowhere. You just had these long half notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. So be ready for that. That'll sneak up on you. Measure 28, we'll start right there. So ready and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 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 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 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 2 and 3 and 4 and next page 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 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 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 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 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and I'm not going to count out the rest. We'll just stop. So a lot of it repeats, right? We said this before, but specifically, so the chorus is at the bottom of page 22, going into the last measure, this octave jump. Now, when you get to page 23, end of the third line, very last note, going into measure 33, same jump. Everything you just played previously, you're repeating again all the way through page 24. And then like the second line of page 24 repeats, I'm sorry, 24, if you go the top line, let's see, measure 38, 39, 40, 41. That repeats when you go down to measure 49. So at measure 49, that all repeats again. Now when you get to the bottom line, measure 55, the ending occurs there, and that's a little different. So going back again, a lot of that repeats. So you're kind of learning 2 pages of music, not 3, just repeats. So the right hand, we covered the notes, the fingering, the rhythm, syncopation, and the counting, getting our steady tempo too. Now the left hand is more sparse. The left hand is probably a little easier. Left hand sort of provides support, harmony. Like I said earlier, the melody's not in the left hand. I don't think any spot where it's in the left hand. We'll double check here in a moment, but it looks like all the notes we play in the right hand were almost all melodies. So now in the left hand, you're going to start below middle C, 4th finger on the F. I'm not going to go too much into the rhythm here because it's pretty basic. It's pretty basic. So really your rhythm in your left hand is going to be maybe a little easier and more helpful to your right hand when you put the hands together. But we'll get into that later. So the left hand, 4 on F, thumb on middle C. Next measure, 5 on E, and then 3 on G, thumb on C. Third measure repeats, right? 4 on F, thumb on C. Once again, 5 on E. Now it's backwards here. Thumb on C, third finger to G. Measure 5, same thing, 4 on F, thumb on C. Next measure is the same as well. 5 on E, same as measure 2. So 3 on G, thumb on C. Now measure 7 is different. My 2 and 4 are on the A and the F. You need to bring 3 and 5 over to A and F. And the reason for this, get that thumb up to D. And then the last measure, your 2 and 4 should be on B and G. And then we have our first little bit of rhythm here on beats 3 and 4, C, B, G. So that would be 3 and 4 and then measure 9, 5 on F, not 4 on F like earlier. You could do that, but see, you just did 4 on G, and it's not going to be smooth if you go. It's not going to be smooth at all. So 5 on the F, thumb on C, and you can easily bring that 5 down to E while you're holding the C for the next measure, measure 10. Third finger G, thumb on C. Next measure 4 on the F, thumb on C. Next measure 5 on E. Here's where it's different. Next you have C. This is also different. Instead of 3 on G, you got 4 on G. And that's so you could do a lot of prepping, it looks like. 5 on F instead of 4 on F, because after the C, we're going to need 3 and C on A and C, 4 and C on G and C, and then measure 15, F and B flat, 5 and 2. And then thumb on D. So that's a little tricky in there with these harmonies. So at 14, you got A and C, 3 and 1. Then you kind of got to curve fingers, strong fingers, G and C, 4 and 1, and then 5 and 2, F and B flat. Bring your thumb up to D. Now measure 16, G and A, B natural, as a reminder, because we just hit B flat, so they're being friendly. Then you got to bring your third finger down to G. G, F, and now we start the chorus. So in your left hand, that's last measure is 5 and 3 on E and G. Thumb up to C. Measure 18 at the top of page 23. G and B, that would be 4 and 2. Now bring your thumb down to the B. so that you can be ready for E and A with 5 and 2 in the next measure. Then you have your thumb on middle C. 2 and 4 should be there for A and F. And keep your 4 on the F for these eighth notes, F, G, A. So that's the same rhythm that we had earlier with the eighth notes. So 3 and 4 and 3 and 5 on the G and the E. Thumb up to C. And 2 and 4 is on F and A, but you need to bring 5 and 3 over for this one. This is a little tricky right here. Make sure that pinky's not too far from F sharp because you're going to need it to do F sharp A. So what you could do here is a little turn of the wrist to get that pinky up. Your third finger is kind of an anchor on the A. Now that brings 2 and 4 probably where it needs to be. Measure 23 right there on the G and B. Beat 3, you have B again, C, measure 24, G and B. And on beat 3, you got eighth notes. Bring your thumb down to B, B, A, G. Should be right there, measure 25 for F and A. And then middle C, down to E and G, middle C. Keep the thumb on middle C, make sure your second finger's on A for this last measure, A and C. Looks like the third finger should be on G for G and C. Measure 28, fourth finger for F, F and C. And then we have E and C. So we got a little pattern going on here. And then we got D and C. And then we're coming back up, E and C. F and C, and then F sharp and C. So let's look at this. Measure 27, last measure, second line. Starting with A and C, 2 and 1. Now you're going to keep the thumb on middle C, and you're walking down basically to each finger to G and C, F and C, and measure 28, and then E and C. Now 29 is D and C, just bring your fifth finger over. Now they're going to walk up, but it's not the same fingers. Now you're bringing 5 and 1 to E and C, 5 and 1 to F and C, and then here you're going to do F sharp with your fourth finger. And then the next measure, G and B, 4 and 2. Okay, so then we got B, C, back to G and B. And beat 3 of this last measure, 3 on G, 4 on C. And then we got measure 33, E and G, 5 and 3. Then we got middle C with the thumb. Next measure, G and B with 4 and 2. Thumb on B. Next measure, 5 and 2 should be there on the E and the A. Thumb on C. 2 and 4 should be there on A and F. And then we have F, G, A, G and B, excuse me, E and G. 5 and 3. Come on, C. Top of page 24, we got F and A, bring 5 and 3 over to F and A. And then you have F sharp and A, remember that little turn of the wrist. Measure 39, G and B with 2 and 4. 2 on the B, 4 on the G. And then you have B, C, back to G and B. And then thumb on the eighth notes, G, B, A, G. Next measure, F and A with 4 and 2. Thumb on C, E and G. Thumb on C. And then here's that same walking down pattern at 43. 2 and 1 on A and F, 3 and 1 on G and C, 4 and 1 on F and C, 5 and 1 on E and C. Expand the hand to D and C. Now bring your fifth finger up to E and C. Bring it up again to F and C. Now earlier we had F sharp. We don't. We have G and C with 4 and 1. And then our last measure on that second line, C, and then A, G, measure 48, back to C. Bring your fifth finger down to these eighth notes, E, F, G, measure 49, F and A, thumb on C, 5 and 3 on E and G, thumb on C. Second finger should be around the A, so A and C, 2 and 1. Here's our walk down, 3 and 1 on G and C, 4 and 1, 5 and 1, measure 53, D and C with 5 and 1, and then bring 5 up to E and C, 5 up to F and C, 4 on G and C. Next measure, we have A and C with 3 and 1. Back to 4 on G and C. And then our third to last measure, we have F and C, 5 and 1. And then eighth notes, F, G, A. And then we have C, down to C an octave lower. And then the last one has 8 VA, which means another octave lower. So again, just like the right hand, the left hand's very repetitive on the last 2 pages. Most of your left hand is half notes. So if you, I'm not really going to take the time because it's a little redundant just to be counting out half notes. But if you want to go through your left hand, even though they're half notes, I still want you to be accurate. So, if you start at the very beginning, still want you to go 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. But it's really your right hand you're going to want to spend a lot more time on for obvious reasons. There's a lot more rhythms, a lot more notes, and that's where all the syncopation is. So your left hand, like I said, it's often just playing on beats 1 and 3 because that's what half notes do. There's a couple of rhythms in there, and we went through them in the left hand with a few eighth notes. Now, where those eighth notes occur in the left hand, actually your right hand is usually holding or resting. So when your right hand is busy, your left hand's probably playing a half notes. And when your left hand is more busy, your right hand's probably holding notes or resting. So, and that's kind of typical, at least at this point in piano, where you want to have both hands really busy and active at the same time. One hand's busy, the other hand's resting, and vice versa. So the left hand might be a little bit easier, make more sense, and just worth just kind of sticking in when you put the hands together. Now, what I often do when I put hands together is I don't always start right away with counting. You can, but the reason why it's so hard for people to put their hands together is coordinating. And when I mean coordinating, I mean the hits. When do the hands play together and when do they not? So I've done this before in previous videos, but obviously at the very beginning, both hands play right away. The next time both hands play is actually a little tricky because the left hand plays while the right hand is holding the tie. And this is where you start feeling that syncopation. So this is where the counting is very important. So yeah, actually, I'm going to suggest because of the syncopation, you actually do go ahead and count. So otherwise, it will actually be more difficult in the long run. So at the very beginning, make sure you got 4 on F, 2 on A. So we've got 1 and 2 and 3. So that 3 is important because that's where the left hand comes in. And then we go on to 4 and, right? So again, that's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now at this point you could go through the whole piece. A lot of times I do, but really good practice is taking that measure and playing it again and again, slightly faster till you get it up to tempo. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and, to the point where you don't have to count it. You start feeling it. And and making sure you don't rush beats 3 and 4 and. You don't want to do this. That's not right, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so. Got it? Next measure would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Everything's playing on the big beats. So both hands on 1, right hand beat 2, left hand beat 3, left hand beat 4. So that's the kind of coordination we're talking about. When does each hand play? So both on 1, right on 2, left on 3, left on 4. And measure 3 is just like measure 1, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now the last measure, 1 and 2 and in the left on 3 and 4 and. Measure 5 is like 1 and 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now that's a little different, but it's by itself. The left hand's holding when you hit these 2/8 notes. Measure 6, we got 1 and 2 and 3. So right there, 1 and 2 and beat 3. Be ready for that. 4 and then measure 7's a little tricky because F and A, I got to switch to 5 and 3, and I got to move 5 up to F. So once you're there, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Similar rhythm. Same rhythm, actually, as measure 1. Different notes, though. And then the last measure of that line, both hands on 1 and 2 and then the left hand by itself on 3 and 4 and. Notice the right hand's holding. Now, when you get to measure 9, you got 5 on F in the left hand, but the 2's got to move to A in the right hand. And this is like the beginning. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 3 and 4 and. So don't forget that. Remember, that's the hard little spot there. It can throw you off in the right hand. Measure 13. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So be ready for that. 3 and. So right after middle C on 3, the G on the and, 4 and then measure 14 is where we jump up. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So remember, don't rush this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. This is tricky because the harmony's now in the left hand. If you have to, do a little review of the fingering and the notes. And then slow it down if you have to. At 14, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now measure 15 is tricky because 1 and right here, 2 and 3 and 4 and. So you got that syncopation, which is the same syncopation as before. It's just the combination of notes now is a little tricky. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and next measure. 1 and 2 and move your left hand. 3 and 4 and. So you got to move your right hand there. And now we go to the chorus. Remember, don't rush it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Now there you have to move your thumb, so be ready for that. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So the nice thing about this song is that the chorus has these longer rhythms, right, that are kind of drawn out a little bit. But when you're putting your hands together, you'll be thankful for it, right? You'll be glad. You're like, now I got time to work on this, okay? I don't have to feel rushed. But that being said, don't rush it. Picking up page 23, last two measures. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Right there on 3, remember you're going to rest in the right hand and kind of let the left hand have its moment. 3 and 4 and next measure, 1 and 2 and bring your second finger to the A. You're hitting middle C in the left hand on beat 3. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and... Now I messed this up, not badly, but this is tricky because in the last measure of the second line, this is where that left hand sort of descending pattern begins. But you got a lot of stuff going on in the right hand. So you got 1 and 2 and third or fourth finger to the E. But then at 28, you're going down to F and C, but you got these eighth notes, right? With the second finger. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so that's a little tricky. And then both hands are just all out right here. Four notes total. 1 and 2 and... Now, this is what I like. In measure 29, look what happens to my fifth finger. Now watch what happens. See the pattern? Now I still have to keep my thumb on C and I'm moving my thumb on G, but the outer notes are moving in. So that coordinates nicely together. But then it gets tricky in measure 30. 5 to F and C with the thumb in the left hand, but thumb on the F and 4 on D. So this whole section you have to go very slow. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... So right here it's hard because you got 5 and 1 in the left hand, but 4 and 1. We kind of want to do 5 and 1 in both hands, or 4 and 1 in both hands, but it's not. And then on beat 3, you've got the F sharp with 4, and up to E with 5. 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Now I'm going to stop right there just to save us a little bit of time because this is where it all repeats. It all repeats. Pretty sure both hands repeat the exact same manner. Let's go, page 24. Let's start at measure 45, right in the middle of the second line. D and C with 5 and 1. A and F with 1 and 5. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and... Now here it's kind of cool, 4 and 1 in both hands. See that? So we actually had 1 and 5, both hands. 1 and 5. 1 and 4. So yeah, they're different notes, but when you have the same finger pattern, that's kind of nice. So hold on to that. Use that to your advantage. Last measure, the F chord in the right hand, C in the left hand. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and remember, hold the C in the right hand, move to E and G. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and measure 49. 1 and 2 and you're resting in the right hand. Move to the 2 on A for beat 3. So 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and... Gotta be ready. I almost missed that. I don't know why, but anyways. 2 and 1 on the A and C. 5 on the G. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now I'll say this. At least right here. Remember we said a possibility of doing the E with 3? Look at what the fingering is in the left hand. So this is measure 49, 50, 51. 3 on the G. So if you got 3 on the E and 3 on the G, there is that coordination. So maybe something to think about that finalizes your decision, but that's up to you. Last measure. So that's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and here we go again with the 1s and the 5s. 1 and 2 and 1s and 5s again. Again, 1 and 2 and we got 4 and 1. And then our third measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and the right hand is tied. 1 and and 3 and 4 and our last two measures, 1 and 2, 3 and 4 and then finally fermata, so you can just let that fade away. All right, that covers the right hand and the left hand. Now I went through that a lot faster and easier than it's going to be. It doesn't matter how much you play those hands separate. It is completely 100% normal when you put the hands together, no matter how well you've learned them separately. When you put them together, it's not going to just magically come together. You've got to dig in. Keep counting. Keep going slow. Feel your way through it. Ask yourself. So when you coordinate, you're basically being aware of, are my hands playing at the same time? Is it my right hand that's playing? Or is it my left hand that's playing? It's one of those three things. Now, sometimes one hand is resting or holding when the other hand's playing. But in terms of the hits, it's either same time, right hand, or left hand. Focus on that. Grab on to moments where you have the same fingering, not the same notes, but the same fingering in both hands. That helps. That helps. That gets you kind of 50% there. The other 50% would be the notes, okay? Obviously, if you worked on your hands separate, which you need to do, that's going to give you the advantage. If you go into this both hands without ever looking at it, that's obviously kind of silly, right? All right, so now we need to put this all together with the pedal. And we're going to talk a little bit about dynamics. And then I'm going to play it through. And eventually I'm going to make, maybe when I get to level 2, I'll be smarter and I'll do a playthrough of these pieces at the beginning of the video. I will have a link in the comment section, the description below actually, to a separate video on my channel that will be just me playing through the piece, not talking, be simply a performance of the piece, and you can use that as reference, especially if you need to just access a quick video of just a performance and not the lesson itself. You can have that at your disposal as well. But let's go ahead and take a moment and let's pull up the pedal camera. Okay, so we got our pedal camera out, ready to go. And we're going to look at the pedaling now, starting back at the beginning of the piece. At this point, I'm just going to put the hands together, of course. So you really want to have not only your right hand and left hand learned, but you probably really want to have both hands learned when you add the pedal. Argument can be made that you can learn the pedal while learning the left hand or after you've learned the left hand, because the left hand often will dictate where the pedaling is. But, you know, I really like to get the hands together first before adding the pedal personally. So I would recommend you do it after you're comfortable pretty much getting the hands together. So when we're at the beginning of the piece, we already talked about, you know, lining up fourth finger F, second finger A, but go ahead and have your foot on the pedal as well. Now, here's the thing. Because the very first thing you play is with pedal, you can kind of have your foot already down on the pedal before you play. So in other words, that's one less thing you have to hit at the beginning. So if your foot's already down, you just play. Otherwise, you could just do it all together at the same time. But the only advantage, besides already having it down and one less thing to think about, is if you come down with your pedal and the hands together at the very beginning, there's a tendency to almost kind of bang it all together, like, you know, because everything's coming down. So that may necessarily happen, but that's just a thought that could happen. But again, if your foot's already down, one less thing to think about. Now, this clearly dictates, you know, that the left hand is sort of in charge of the pedal here at the beginning, because when you hit the middle C on beat 3, that's where you pedal. Now, as a quick review, your pedal, by the way, comes up when you come down on C. So almost think of as when I hit C, my foot pops off. Your foot does not come off before. You don't want to do this. Because when you do that, you put a break in the sound, and that defeats the whole point of the pedal, right? So once again, hit the C, and that pushes your foot off, and then you're right back down. So it's an up-down motion. It's pretty quick. So I did it wrong. Sorry. Got it? So once again, you can have your foot down before you start. Now my pedal is kind of noisy if you've got a keyboard pedal. I've been using the piano pedals for most of my videos. This is the first time I've used a keyboard pedal. It's a little noisy, you know, but even pedals on the piano sometimes can be a little noisy. So I just realized before I actually edit the video, I'll probably mute that out so it won't even matter. You won't hear it. Well, actually, you might hear it actually in one of my other mics while I'm playing, so never mind. So I apologize, a little noisy, but I was going to say if it's a little noisy, well, I'm digressing here. Okay, let's start over again. Okay. Once again, take 2, synchronizing in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so we got the pedal camera out and our pedal ready to go. And we're going to start at the very beginning with hands together. When you're working the left hand, you could work the pedal as well. I like to add the pedal after I got both hands together, but the reason why you could do it with the left hand is often, and especially in this piece, but in most pieces actually, the pedaling is dictated by the left hand. So if you kind of skim through the music from the very beginning, notice that almost every note, especially every half note that's being played in the left hand, is where you're actually lifting the pedal, or pedaling, I should say, because you're not going to lift. You're going to come up and back down. So let's review, by the way, the deal with pedaling here. So at the very beginning, you can have the foot already down on the pedal if you want. The reason for that is if you're playing both hands and the pedal at the same time, we might have this tendency to just go down too heavy because both our hands, our foot, everything's coming down at once. And remember, this is a delicate piece. So if you already have your foot down, that's one less thing you have to think about. And you can be a little bit more delicate because you're not worried about your foot coming down as well. So I strongly recommend, especially in this piece, already have your foot down. Now, this C is where we pedal. You don't want to lift and then hit the C. So remember, the way this works is you don't lift your foot until you come down on the C. And think of it as this. I can't lift my foot until I push the C to release it. And then you're right back down. So it's an up-down motion. So again, from the beginning, and then you're right back down. And then the next measure, we pedal again. And I'm going to kind of exaggerate here. I'm going to lift my hands. And the reason I'm doing this is when everyone lifts their hands, they want to lift the foot. But that's not the way it works, because when you're lifting your hands, the whole point is to still be on the pedal so you can still hear the sound, and then it's not choppy, right? So I'm going to lift my hands, and when I come down on the notes, that's when I lift my foot and I'm right back down. And the reason you're right back down is, what if you did this? If I'm not holding, see, let's see. Okay. When I go to that G, I've lost the C in my right hand because my foot's still off the pedal. The whole point is to smoothen out that C and G. Got it? So that's why you want to be right back down on the pedal. So I'm not really going to go through the entire piece in great detail because it's once you get the concept of pedaling, no matter what the notes are, it's the same concept. So the very beginning, like I said, have the pedal down and then gently play. So every time the left hand has a half note, or every 2 beats, it looks like we're pedaling. So remember, hit the note, pop off, and then right back down. Now, of course, you can go out of tempo. I'm out of tempo. So when you're first learning or relearning pedaling, feel free to take your time. Get the concept down. But it's pretty much every 2 beats, isn't it? And the other thing is, notice I'm not lifting my whole foot, right? I'm not doing that. I'm only, my heel stays down, and I'm just kind of up and down motion, a very gentle up and down. It's very little movement. Now, some pedals will take more movement than others. If you have a stiff pedal, obviously you got to do more work. If you have a very stiff pedal, very big piano, and you're a beginner, a very young beginner, so if you are, a child learning this piece, you might have to lift your entire foot. I had to when I was a child because it was just too much for me. I was very small when I started using pedal. I was only about 8 years old, but I was a small kid. So when I first learned the concept, I really had to bang my foot. And so, if you're an adult, you probably don't have to do that. I would advise against doing that. Now, you might have to make big motions. I'm okay with that, but definitely work on getting that heel planted and just doing this up-down motion. Now, in time, it'll become easier, and like I said, it'll be very little movement. But at that point, you're so used to it and comfortable with it, you're almost not even thinking about it anymore. What I do want you to think about, and why I want you to actually go out of tempo, is, don't be afraid to lift your hand, because that's where you're going to practice, because lifting your hand is when we tend to lift our foot, right? Which I said earlier. So I don't mind you taking the time to do that concept of lifting the hand, making sure that foot's down, and then when you come down on the note, that's when you pop off. That's so important. Now, you've had pedal before if you've been following my lessons, but just in case you're at that point, now's a good time, because it's just going to get harder and harder. So if you haven't mastered pedaling, now's a good time to really do that. So as we go through the piece, it's pretty much every 2 counts, but it's always the same concept. So there's not really much else to teach, except when you get to the end of the second line, notice at measure 8, the pedal comes off completely. So here we are, measure 8. Now the reason there's no pedaling here is that right there, the C and B. This is called a minor second. A minor second. So whenever you have one note on the piano played by the very next note, it makes a very horrible, clashy sound. Now in this case, they're 2 white notes. A lot of times it would be a white key and a black key, right? So when you play them without pedal, it's fine. But when you have pedal, you hear that? It starts clashing. So a lot of times, especially in the left hand, when that happens, there's just no pedal at all. So this is a little tricky, because here, as soon as you hit the C, you pop off and you stay off. Make sure you're holding the D with your finger, because now you don't have the pedal holding that D for you. You should be holding it anyways, but just in case, right? Because you could lift the D and the pedal's still holding. But so lift the pedal. So you're going to have to actually hold your foot up a little bit. And then when you come down and measure 9, now everything's down together. But be gentle. Remember at the beginning I said have your foot down and then be gentle. You can't do that measure 9. You can't have your foot down because of this. So now you got to work on being light when you come down. Because you don't want to go pound it all together, because then it's out of character, right? You're too loud. Now that happens again when you get to measure 20, top of page 23. Third measure in. It's the same idea. Now there, it's not quite a minor second, F, G, and A. But even still, all 3 of these notes are really close together. It gets a little muddy. It's not terrible, but this cleans it up. Oops, I'm doing the wrong fingering there. So no pedal at all just makes it cleaner. And then you'll just come down gently in the next measure. I've got the wrong fingering, so, which is good, because I want you to realize that you really want to know this very, very, very well with both hands, right fingering, everything. Because when you start adding the pedal, you're thinking about pedal. You're not going to be thinking about notes. So you kind of want those notes and that fingering to really be almost memorized at this point. Going to measure 24 on the second line, same deal, right? You're here and then you're coming off. Now, actually, I forgot to lift. There in the right hand, you do lift. So going back to measure 23. So there, you could say in measure 24, I got to lift my foot and my right hand together on beat 3. So once again, in measure 23, we're here. And then only the left hand plays. And then together in measure 25, and then the right hand joins in. So, those spots are a little tricky. They're a little tricky. Measure 30, third line down, third measure in. They've broken the pedal there between measure 30 and 31. So here we are, measure 30. We're going to pedal. No, actually, we're going to come off. When you hit the F sharp and C, come off the pedal, and then come back down the next measure. And the reason for that, this E to D, I don't know. I don't think it would be that bad, but the F to F sharp, of course, but see, we're pedaling there anyways. Well, go ahead and just lift your foot and then come back down to the next measure. Notice at the bottom of the page, measure 34, 35, 36. So there's a constant theme here with the pedaling. Whenever the left hand has these eighth notes, no matter what they are, it just gets busier. And when you have busyness, especially lower on the piano, it can clash a little bit more if you're not careful. So just whenever you have these eighth notes and quarter note, you're just not going to pedal. And you can see that again at measure 48. And then near the end, third measure from the end. No pedal there. Now, the last two measures of the song, you're holding down the pedal, and that's just because these are all C's. So that makes sense. There's no clashing there. But whenever that left hand changes, basically every 2 beats, it looks like. I just noticed something. Measure 39, top of page 24. So here we are at 38. Let me get my fingering. So we're going to measure 39. Now, the heavy pedaling on this B, but not on the C. I wouldn't do that. I would pedal B and the C. Because, remember the rule? B to C, that's a minor second. That clashes. So I would pedal the B, which they have marked. Actually, tell you what, I wouldn't pedal there at all. To make it clean, come off the pedal when you hit the B, stay off on the C, and then back down on the G and B. So I would mark that. I wouldn't pedal there because that B to C is a minor second. Now, if you go over to measure 47, the last measure on the second line, it's A to G. That's not a minor second. So that's okay. But B to C is. So I don't like that there. I mean, it's a nitpick, but if you really think about it and listen, yeah, it clashes. So see the difference when there's no pedal? So I wouldn't pedal there. So that basically covers the pedal. There's not much more to it, but like I said, review the concept if you're still struggling. The nice thing about it is once you've got the concept down, that's it from here on out. There's not too much more to deal with pedaling. It's pretty consistent. Now, that doesn't mean it's not always going to be challenging, especially when you get to busier pieces and maybe you pedal more frequently. But just the idea of how to pedal and when to pedal is pretty consistent. Pretty much when the left hand changes, not necessarily notes, but harmonies. But in this piece, the harmony changes, the chord changes pretty much every 2 beats, okay? Now, the other thing is, before I play the whole piece for you straight through, the other thing is dynamics. Well, I already mentioned at the very beginning, it's soft, mezzo piano. So it's delicate. When you get to the chorus, it builds. So at 15 and 16, those measures at the bottom, it's getting louder and louder, crescendo. So at 14, measure 14, you're kind of soft, mezzo piano. you get bigger. And then we're mezzo forte, which makes sense. That's pretty typical of a lot of songs. You start soft on a verse, you get louder on the chorus. Okay? Notice in measure 23, 24, 25 on page 23, it gets softer. We're back to mezzo piano. So gradual. Now, when measure 24, your right hand has this D that was tied, and then you're off. So these three notes in the left hand will actually control the diminuendo. So obviously if a right hand's holding a note, that's not going to get softer except for the fact it's fading away. But when you play those notes, notice how I'm getting softer. So obviously you know soft how that works on the piano. Lighter touch when you go softer. So each note gets a little lighter of a touch with your fingers. And then gentle, back to mezzo piano. Got it? Next line down, last two measures, crescendo. And then forte. So now you're even louder, which makes sense. The second time you're repeating the chorus, you're even louder. Top of page 24, get softer. Same deal. In that third measure, measure 40. Those notes in the left hand will help you get a little bit softer. It stays mezzo piano until 49. Now you're a little bit louder. So 49, right fingering here. And that is actually going to stay mezzo forte into the end. Notice RIT period in measure 54, 55, 56. Ritardando, gradually slowing down. And then you can really just drag this out at the end. If you want to get softer, you can. That always works, sort of fading away. So not a whole lot with the dynamics, but on the whole, the piece is kind of a sweet song until you get to the chorus. Then it builds up a little bit louder. All right, so my pedal's slowly moving away on me here, but let me bring that a little bit closer here. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and play it through for you. So I'll give you a little count off and get my page turn ready. Hopefully I can make my page turn. By the way, I didn't talk about the page turn. Let me talk about that. Flip the bottom of your page, and you may even bend that. That allows you to grab that and turn it more easily. Now you can always make a photocopy, of course, of that third page and then just have all three pages there. No page turn. But if you want to save paper, flip that if you don't mind bending your book a little bit. That way you can grab that. Now, you're going to grab it with your left hand because your right hand is playing melody. So what does that mean in your left hand? So look at the last two measures at 23. So here we are, second to last measure. Here's what I do. So you're going to cheat a little bit with the music. While you hit the E and the G, your left hand's going to come up. You're going to play the G and the C. So you kind of have to memorize this. And turn with your left hand. That means you're cutting out that middle C. It'll sound fine. The pedal, you're just going to hold the pedal until you get to the next page. So this is a pretty typical practice. When you have page turns, obviously you've got to turn the page with one of your hands. Most of the time, if not all the time, it's going to be whichever hand's not playing melody. You can't just cut out your melody. That's the main part of your song. Now your left hand in this case is doing harmony. That C is just sort of another harmony note, right? But if you hold the E and the G, this doesn't always work 100% of the time, but in this case it works. If you hold the E and the G and then play that C, that G and C, it's not going to sound bad. And then just pedal here. Now, if you don't like that, if you say, I'm going to play it exactly as written and I'm not going to do that, then you have to make a photocopy or hire a page turner. I don't like doing either of those. So now, if you're really advanced, you could really totally change this up, but this is hard. More advanced. You can actually catch the C with your right hand and 2 with the G, and then 5 on that C, and then just completely jump up. Now, that's more advanced. I'm not going to encourage that right now. I'm not going to get to that, but that's what a more advanced person who's been playing for a long time would do. So, like this. So, you see, that then I didn't leave anything out. Now, that doesn't always work easy all the time because sometimes there's a lot more notes in that. But, yeah, practicing page turns can be a thing. So in this case, eliminate the left hand on beats 3 and 4. Your pedal is going to help you because your pedal will hold this out. And then you're turning while you're playing. So if you're turning while you're playing, that means you have to be comfortable with knowing that G's on beat 3, C's on beat 4, the fingering is 1 and 2. Pretty much have it memorized because you're going to be thinking about turning that page. So I almost forgot about that. That's very important. So keep that page curled up there in the end. That makes it a lot easier. All right. I'm going to give you a count off, and I'll play it all the way from the beginning. All right. So here we are. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... I will say that after playing that, I wish I was back on my piano again that I used before. But as I had mentioned in the previous video, I started using this keyboard just because the piano was just going out of tune and giving me so many problems. But you could be more expressive when you're on a piano. So there's certain things that I probably could have done a little bit more of with the dynamics. But that's okay. Hopefully this gives you a good enough idea. I will put up another video, a separate video. There'll be a link to it where, again, I play this all by itself just as a performance. I'll have a different camera angle too. Not that that makes any difference, but just to make it a little more interesting and sort of put it in more of a performance mood, and maybe I'll play it actually a little bit different. But, you know, as I was playing this, I was just sort of overthinking the pedal and the fingering and all, and just kind of doing that on purpose just to sympathize that this is a hard piece. So what I said at the very beginning of the lesson, I still believe it's true that if you are going through the lesson book, the Alfred lesson book, level 1 series, and you're on page 83, don't expect this piece to be really, really easy just because you made it to page 83 or 131 in the all-in-one course. Again, it's taking everything you've learned, but it's just compiling it. And, that in itself is hard because now you got to think about so many different things and piece them together in this giant jigsaw of a puzzle. So if you get to this piece and you finish page 83 and you're frustrated, that's okay. Like I said, take your time, come back later, maybe even finish book 1. Because personally, after going through all of book 1, at that point you're being a lot more comfortable scenario for this piece and a lot of these pieces at this point in this book. So again, don't be frustrated. Otherwise, either way, there's a lot going on. Take your time. This will take weeks, depending on how much time you put into it. Maybe months, if you want to get this, absolutely perfect in every which way. Again, just depends how much time you put into it. But yeah, I was thinking about pedaling. I was thinking about fingering, and yeah, there's a lot of pedaling. You're constantly pedaling. There's a lot of fingering, and I missed a few. So take your time, be patient, break it down. Don't be afraid to go back, hands separate. Don't be afraid to go back without the pedaling. Don't be afraid to slow it down. Don't be afraid to repeat a measure or two again, and again, especially when it comes to rhythm, syncopation. So a lot of things going on in this piece. Pop music is not the easiest music out there. Don't let anyone tell you differently. You can have a piece that has maybe 3 chords in it, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be easier. Not saying this piece has 3 chords, but it has a lot of the same chords. But rhythmically, it can be extremely challenging. So, all right, let me know what you think in the comments below. If you have any suggestions, anything I can do in the future to make this easier, make it go faster. It's been a long video, but it's a hard piece. It's a long piece. There's a lot going on. I don't want to skip out on anything. I want to cover every detail so that you're able to follow along with ease. And for some of you, maybe you don't need to hire a private teacher. You can just follow these lessons, and that's enough for you. So again, let me know what you think. Thanks for sticking around. I wish you all the best on your practice, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.